Good day everyone, how is it? It's Shadow Weekday here, or One Angry Pagan, and this video is probably going to be for the latter, One Angry Pagan, because I just am one angry pagan. Yeah, we're going to do Politics Live, and this would be for yesterday, so that would make it the 17th of Æfterra, Geola, or the 9th of January, whatever. Just, you know, the usual pre-warnings, like, I am one angry pagan, so I don't hold back on my swearing. I'm not going to apologise for that. Just pre-warning to people. Might have a fragile disposition towards that kind of language. I'm not racist, I'm not sexist, but I am anti-Christian, anti-Judaism, anti-Muslim. I'm not anti-Semitic in the abusive sense. I am anti-Abrahamic. Just so that things are cleared up on that front, because I've not been tarred with this fucking racist brush that I don't have. Also, please subscribe if you like the video. Please like it. Once again, this is audio only. You see my reaction. Not getting done for a fucking copyright. So yeah, audio only. But it's just, you're gonna get the full thing. I will mostly pause it when I speak, so I'm not speaking over them. So you get to hear exactly what's being said. And if I feel that that I've spoken over, I will rewind. So yeah. But yeah. Here we go. This is BBC Politics Live from yesterday.
It's Monday, the 9th of January. This is Politics Live.
Just wanted to add, if anyone hasn't seen my video yet, Mick Lynch's direct message to him to the RMT members. My dad sent it to me.
Joining,
and well, basically it's left me to a point of, I grew up around the railways. If you live in Britain, be terrified about what the companies and the government want to do to our railway. Be terrified. Anyway.
Me today, Conservative MP and former Cabinet Minister Robert Buckland, Labour MP and Shadow Justice Secretary Steve Reed, New Statesman Associate Editor Rachel Cunliffe, and former Conservative advisor Salma Shah. On the programme today,
possibly a Labour government would outlaw the sale, the buying, the smoking of cigarettes.
Well, the New Zealand government are doing it. We want to see how that works, but I'm genuinely curious.
Labour are talking about it. Should cigarettes be banned?
No.
It's just a personal choice. It's about healthcare.
I hate to sound like I'm just copying Rishi Sunak, you know, but I smoke, and I'm not apologetic for it. This is my choice. I like smoking. I don't want to quit. It's not something that I feel that I was ever peer pressured into. I like smoking. I'm going to carry on smoking. This is a cultural. It's also a cultural thing, you know. You know, there are most people these days don't smoke. So I'm not sure why did you pick on the minority that do.
I think is somewhat that is private.
Does it matter if the Prime Minister uses private healthcare?
Gotta say, mostly I try to buy from suppliers that aren't so unscrupulous in their resource.
If there's no extra money, then there can't be any movement. So we'll see what we get from this meeting.
Will public sector workers be offered more money to avert further strikes?
No.
And we'll hear from the owner of a small business waiting to hear what further help she'll get with her energy bills from government. And Happy New Year, belatedly, on the first Politics Live of 2023. Welcome to you all. To start the programme, you heard the Shadow...
Just add, for us pagans, it was New Year months ago.
Health Secretary Wes Streeting, talking about banning smoking, or at least banning the sale of cigarettes. A good idea, Robert?
Well, I think if we focus upon the need to make sure that young people don't take up the habit, and I know in other countries they are now phasing out the sale
what New Zealand is
and
doing.
moving it up the age range so you can't buy it before 21.
Well,
that is an interesting proposal. I do think ultimately, though, with a decreasing number of people, thankfully, smoking and resorting to smoking, we are now relying on personal choice and public information and the health education I think we all are extremely aware of. I wouldn't say it's not an idea for the UK, but I think it's one that we should really be focused on children and young people and making sure they don't take up what could be a lifelong habit, which is, of course, life-limiting.
A good idea, I presume you think it is, from your colleague?
No, I mean, I largely agree with what Robert just said. I mean, what Wes didn't say we're going to ban smoking. What he said is we'll look at what's happening in New Zealand and see what we can learn from that.
Yes. Now, I've spent a couple, at least one or two videos talking about the subject of absolutism in our political discourse. It's ridiculous. For a start, it's unrealistic. And I say this not with the naivety that I used to have when it comes to politics, because I'm sorry, but politics has a lot to do with most aspects of our lives. So, the decisions that the people that we choose to represent us make decisions that affect how we live our lives to a certain degree, whether you like it or not. Now, I bring this up because you get these idiots in the media who will take something that a journalist, a politician has said, and apply an absolute to it. What? There are no absolutes. There really aren't. Not unless we're talking about black holes. So I don't accept these. I like how Steve Reid here, Shadow Justice Secretary for Labour, is challenging not just what's being asked of him, but the question in of itself. Yeah? Like, he doesn't use the same words I am, but he's actually challenging the absolutism. Starmer did the same thing the other day, and you won't get a lot of people point this out. But Starmer did the same thing the other day on the Sophie Ridge on Sunday, right? And that was pointing out. Oh, what was it? That was it. Immigrate. Subject of immigrate. Oh, how many people would you let across? It's not about the fucking numbers. Well, he didn't swear, obviously, but it's not about the numbers. We look at the actual problem rather than the surface issue, which is the numbers of people. That's not the actual problem. The problem are the criminal gangs that are facilitating this in the first place. Labour's idea of setting up a criminal task force specifically for this, and then coming to agreements with the law side of things, law and justice side of things in the EU. Well, especially you're not coming from such a belligerent fucking UK government anymore. The EU and EU countries are more likely to be a lot more giving towards us, agreeing towards us. Now, I know Labour have actually been going over to the EU and talking with people in the EU and the EU constituency countries about policy agreements and closer alignment. They've already been doing this. But all I get is, oh, Labour are being hypocrites, Labour are being hypocrites. Step back. Look at the bigger picture here. There are lots of isolated things that I get so pissed off with, but my big anger, my big rage is towards the attention put towards this surface bollocks and the inattention and the purposeful inattention towards the deeper problems. And challenging the question not just by what is said, but by the nature of the question in of itself, it being an absolutist question, means that a realistic answer isn't, you can't do. It's not really possible. This is where journalists really need to. I would say journalists really need to get better with their questions and the way they understand what's just been heard.
De facto, it would, wouldn't it? By a certain date,
Well, the government's got a target already to stop smoking by 2030, but it looks very unlikely they're going to meet that. And when Therese Coffey was the health secretary,
it was really hilarious her trying to come out with this stop smoking shit when she A, smokes and B, drinks on a semi-regular basis. It's ridiculous.
cancelled a number of the smoking cessation programs that help people to make better choices. So
yeah, because she smokes as well. Now, don't get me wrong. Because I smoke, just because I smoke doesn't mean I don't think that there should be these programs to stop young people from smoking in the first place. I'm not against that. I already smoke, and it should be my decision whether or not to stop.
I think there is a role for government in helping people, giving them information. Smoking is still the single biggest cause of cancer in our country, and that is obviously terrible for people individually, but it's also a huge drain on the National Health Service.
Should people ultimately be banned from buying cigarettes?
No. I think that there is a difference between encouraging people to make healthier choices and giving them the tools and the programs and funding those programs to make that possible. But if you're going to have the government ban you from doing something, there has to be very clear evidence and a very clear sort of public health and also economic case for that. And in this particular case, the argument is a little bit muddied. I think the extra work on the NHS and social care is about 3.6 billion a year. Tobacco duties bring in 10 billion a year. So that's not an argument, obviously, to encourage people to take up smoking, but it's sort of an argument against government intervention in people's lives and people's personal choices. Banning cigarettes in public places where people can't avoid secondhand smoke, very strong moral case for doing that. Banning
and it's
people,
happened
and it's happened. Banning people from what they choose to do with their own body, very different case.
That's interesting. I mean, it's true there are fewer people dying from smoke-related illnesses than there used to be, but as you said, it's still a significant cause of diseases like cancer, and there are still 74,600 deaths attributable to smoking, according to the NHS in 2020. Ban it or not?
No, I'm largely where Rachel is, actually, that governments shouldn't be allowed to ban anything, especially without evidence. But the logic of this is obvious. We're all sat here talking about it. The health secretary's had a good outing, the politics of this.
He's the Shadow Health Secretary.
Yeah, so, forgive me, Shadow Health Secretary, getting ahead of myself. But the reality is that even though conceptually this is a really interesting...
I find that quite funny. Salma Shah, former Conservative advisor, she's, in her words, saying she's getting ahead of herself by calling Shadow Health Secretary the Health Secretary. Does this mean that the Tories the Tory advisors, people in Tory circles, are expecting Labour to be in charge after the next election? I mean, this could just be nothing. It could just be a nothing, but it's still interesting.
And something that you can't really argue with policy that's being put forward, there are consequences to it. So the hole that HMRC is going to have to fill as a consequence of smoking cessation is naturally going to be a headache for the Treasury. So in order for this actually to happen, a lot of things need to happen in between. And I think this is a very good policy announcement, gets people talking, gets people thinking. But is it actually something that's going to be delivered?
Steve, do you agree with that?
Well, I do agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean,
There is a talking
bad
point.
start to the new year in that we're very consensual around the table here. but I think we do need to keep looking at what more we can do, because the target to get people to stop smoking is a good one for people's health, but it has to be done by helping people take choices, not by forcing people.
Well, let's see if that consensus continues with this headline in the Daily.
But like I said, he challenged her question in the first place, should it be banned? Because the first thing he says, well, that's not what Streeton was saying. And it wasn't. Don't just apply what you think you've heard. Go back and actually listen to every word. There's a difference. Human psychology does this all the time. It's not pseudoscience. Human psychology does this all the time.
Mirror. As NHS patients suffer, one rule for the Rishi. This is Rishi Sunak refusing to say whether or not he actually is registered with the
Yeah, you know, Thatcher didn't have any problems coming out saying he's used private. But at the very least she was open about it. This is a man who is scared of the public. Starmer is bang on, and he has been bang on about Sunak ever since he came in. He's a weak leader. Now, you can say what you want about Starmer, but Sunak is such a weak leader. He can't even be solid about himself. That's how bad this is.
private GP or pays for private healthcare. Should he come clean, Robert?
I think this is a big red herring. I mean, you can put against that point the fact that Rishi's parents both worked in the medical profession and worked with the NHS.
It's got nothing to do with it. You know, you could by his own logic, you could take that, but you could also apply that. Yeah, his parents worked in there, and he doesn't want to go to it because he knows how shit his party have made it compared to what it was. This is absolutist thinking.
Part of it, and therefore you can say that he's lived with this experience and therefore knows a lot more perhaps than other people who haven't had that family experience. I don't think that's material. I think what is material is whether the government is committed to more investment in the NHS, which it clearly is, and whether it's
not enough. This is non-absolutism done very slyly, saying we're all for putting more investment in. But it's not enough, is it? If it was, we wouldn't be in the shit. We wouldn't be in, or at least we wouldn't be in half as much shit if enough investment had been put in. But this is the difference. The Tories like say, oh, we are putting investment in. Yeah, but it's not enough. Put investment in till it works. Then you can find out how much. Then you can start attributing numbers. Don't try with the numbers game until you've done it.
Committed to making sure that we deal with the current pressures that are particularly exacerbated by winter pressures and indeed the COVID backlog. That's how you judge a government, not on individual choices.
Right, but on that, you say he can point to his parents, as you say, family working in the NHS, so why not just come clean?
Well, look, it's a matter for him. I'm not here to, tell colleagues what to do and what to say. They've got to use their best judgment. I mean,
he's supposed to be a public representative. Not only that, but he's supposed to be the leader of our public representatives. I mean, I still don't get how this Prime Minister is representative of this country. certainly doesn't represent me. I'm white pagan. Now I get that, and that doesn't mean I'm right wing either. I am a socialist, but you know, like, yeah, he's on one hand you got, yeah, he's good. He represents, when he first came, yeah, it was good. You know, at least he represents, finally one of the minorities is represented, but only in a skin sense, in a skin color sense. Sorry, because. I keep saying this, one of the things the Tories have been really like doing is disguising the class war by saying, oh, we're not being racist. You'd be surprised at just how much that has worked.
Thatcher had private health insurance, she spoke about it. I really don't think it's material. If it was having an effect on policy, then fine. But,
yeah, but it kind of is. Because there's more outsourcing from the NHS than there ever was. I'm not saying that that I don't have arguments with what Keir Starmer said the other day, with the outsourcing. But the truth of the fact is that for a long time, we've had to outsource, and the reality of it is like, we're not going to be able to immediately go in and just immediately quit outsourcing, right? Here's a thought exercise, right? Labour come in, and just for the sake of argument, it's a Corbyn government, okay? Just for the sake of argument, it's a Corbyn government that was come in and just immediately nationalise everything, renationalise everything, okay? Not everything, but the vital stuff. Now, how are you going to deal with backlash when we're short, when our economy has been knackered? Not only that, but the infrastructure is also knackered. It's not like Labour can come in with a working infrastructure to re-improve standards, because the Tories have also broken the infrastructure. So Labour will have to rely, at least to a point, on outsourcing to begin with. This is why Starmer was talking about partnership with the private sector. Yeah? But he also said each party knowing their roles. Like The Rock from WWE. Know your damn role. Anyway. But yeah, like, it's applying a non-absolutist thought process to it. And when you actually think about it, it's the same thing with the EU. You can argue all you like about rejoining the EU. I agree, we should rejoin the EU. But it won't happen straight away. And the EU won't take us back until all parties agree. They've already said this. I don't like attributing absolutism, but the EU have already said this. Which means we need to get the Tories back on board, which they won't be for a while. Or it doesn't look like they will be for a while. So, look, Labour could come in and do all the things that people want. But it's how. Again, it's not like with Blair. Major had managed to leave a somewhat functioning infrastructure that Labour could improve. Could start to build upon. But not this time. Unless Rishi Sunak can really start to make improvements in the next 2 years before the Tories are fucked. No. I'm sorry, but like, you can't expect Labour to just come in and staffing. Okay. One of the arguments from Maximilian Robespierre, is we need to, you need to rejoin the EU. But again, this is going to be like a 10, 15, 20-year process. It's the reality of it. That's where the Tories have left us. Yes, as I said earlier, Labour have already been making overtures to Europe and to EU countries. But we're not going to be able to rejoin like that, and we're not going to have as favourable terms as we did before. So what do you expect Labour to do? Not only that, but Labour right now don't want to stoke arguments. Yes, tides are turning, but it's not an absolute. Labour are trying to play this game clever. And so far, they're not doing too bad. Yes, could do better in my own opinion. But at the same time, they're not doing too bad. At all. A lot of these contradictions that people keep pointing out that I've seen of Labour have been very absolutist and tunnel vision in their criticism. Because when you look at the wider picture, at what Labour are doing in the longer game, and if you take everything that is said, not just what you think has been said, it's not as bad as you think it is from Labour. It's not as good as it could be, but it's not as bad as people keep passing it off. I'm hopeful with, optimistic at least, somewhat, with Starmer government coming in, because at least we'll have someone sensible in charge. I'm not saying Corbyn wouldn't have been. Corbyn got me into politics, but the point of it is, unlike the last 5 prime ministers, we'll have finally someone who is, pretty level-headed. I think all this trying to get into power, get Labour back into power, is not what he usually does. Laying down the law, sorting out problems, is what Starmer is used to doing. Not trying to get them to that point in the first place. Although he did do a pretty good job at reforming the CPS. So, but yeah.
It's not.
Does it matter?
I don't think it does. I mean, frankly, I'm not very bothered about the decisions Rishi takes about his private life. I'm much more concerned about the fact he doesn't seem to know what's going on in the National Health Service.
Again, wider picture. Steve Reid is not so much, about the little isolated tunnel vision problem, but he's the bigger, wider problem. He's getting sucked into he's not getting sucked into what the journalists want him to get sucked into. I like this dude.
Vast majority of the population are using. He keeps telling us there's not a crisis in the NHS. Well, I wonder what an NHS crisis looks like to this Prime Minister when you've got over 7 million people in waiting lists. People are dying at home because ambulances are taking hours to come.
It's because he's surrounded by confirmation bias.
Constituents, elderly and very ill constituents, waiting.
It's probably an ill-advised statement. But there's going to be some confirmation bias with the Tories. They're so susceptible to it.
In A&E for over 12 hours and still not being seen.
He spent all day Saturday talking about the NHS
He's
crisis.
telling us it's not a crisis. I wonder what he thinks a crisis looks like. Now, we're putting some proposals on the table. We would scrap non-dom status so that we could fund the biggest increase in doctors and nurses our NHS has ever seen. That would help to cut the way.
I've had so many idiots go, oh, well, how is that going to bring money in? You're just going to stop the money. No, because the money would then the taxes that were going abroad would be going into the UK. I swear people don't understand redistribution of maths. Because that's all I see money as is maths.
But that's quite a long term, isn't it? If you're saying the crisis...
Yes, but we need long-term thinking. Yes, short term. Like, again, this is something I am thankful to Starmer for talking about this. Not just on Sunday, but on Monday as well. Because he turned around and said, yes, we need to sort we need to do these bandage, sticking plaster on these problems right now. But we need to think about fundamental long-term change. This is what Labour have been harping on about. It might not be in exactly the way that a lot of people want, but it's long-term change. Labour are looking at long-termism here. Bigger picture thinking.
This is now. What would you do right now? I mean, this headline in the Times says Sir Keir Starmer backs use of private sector healthcare. Right. You want more private provision.
There's spare capacity in the private health sector. So why don't we use that for the top?
Right. There are some that people are right on the left when they say, but the NHS doctors mostly go to work and do side work in it. It's not. That again. There's absolutism there. There are private doctors who just work as private doctors. Sorry, but it's just the truth. But if there is extra capacity somewhere, then we must use it. Again, they're asking what we do right now. This isn't a long-term solution. This is something we do right now. And again, you talk about fucking, it is a staffing problem. Yes, it is a staffing problem. But we can't solve that immediately just by just reopen the tax. But you need to repass through legislation to do that, which again takes time. This cannot be done immediately. In either case, it's going to take time. And what Labour want to do is train in our own country, bring in people to work, as well as if there is extra capacity in the private sector, use it. It's a multi-pronged approach. It's non-absolutism. I like this. I don't like the fact that they're having to use the private sector, but the fact that they've got a multi-pronged approach to it means there is a higher chance of success. Think about the bigger picture.
Time being, I mean, the key has got to be to get people treated faster. If people are dying at home, people aren't getting into a hospital bed from A&E. We need to expand to where there is capacity and use it, and that is a plan Labour's put on the table.
I mean, should he just say it is a crisis? Rishi Sunak sort of say the word and admit that it is a crisis.
Judging by his actions, I mean, he spent all day Saturday in Number 10 talking with...
But he's saying this is not a crisis. That's exactly what he fucking said. Oh, this is not a crisis. The NHS isn't in crisis. But it is in crisis. Why can't he fucking say, oh, just look at his actions. Yeah, but... Oh...
with other ministers and indeed with key stakeholders in the health service to talk about the very great pressures that the health service is facing. I don't think he's not enough. Yeah, but hold on, Steve. I don't think it's fair to say he's like an ostrich. He is very much aware of the problems.
We've barely fucking seen him. I wonder how many people even realise that Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister anymore. What the fuck? That's a complete bullshittery right there.
The NHS is facing. I'm expecting that there'll be an announcement today from the Health Secretary about more help and more investment to deal with that problem of getting people out of hospital and back into the community, which, in my hospital, 1 in 5 beds are occupied in that way. We've got to do something about it. I mean, I would be expansive, and I certainly, with the private sector, we've used it before. The booking choices that patients have in the NHS allow the private sector to be used. I'd even think about using other countries. I mean, other countries use our resources very often, particularly with mental health specialisms. Why not be expansive? Why not think expansively about dealing with...
Because you've gone pissed off, especially the closest countries to us. That's fucking why. idiocy is unreal.
Well, before we continue on that discussion, particularly about the private sector, the issue of Rishi Sunak and whether he himself uses private healthcare, I don't know whether our two politicians have ever paid for an operation, they might like to say, or not. Is it important? Does it matter? Was that a no?
No. Same, yeah.
I think it matters that he didn't have a line or an answer ready in that interview, and that he seems very cagey about it and actually seems quite irritated to be asked. If you are at a time...
I think... I've heard this elsewhere as well, but I think he was rather scarred by the whole non-dom status thing. It's really gotten to him. Again, weak Prime Minister, but it's this kind of personal stuff really gets to Rishi Sunak.
Time when the NHS very clearly is in crisis, and the accusation, whether fair or not, is that the Prime Minister isn't aware or hasn't got a grip on the crisis. It's a fair question to ask. Now, he could say, yes, I do have private health insurance, or I do use the private sector because I have the resources, I have the wealth to be able to do that, and therefore take the pressure off the NHS, and actually that is a moral choice, that is a moral decision. You can make that argument. He didn't want to make that argument. He doesn't want to answer the question. And actually, when you are Prime Minister, when you are a public figure, you have to be prepared that people are going to ask, hang on, you're in charge of our public health system, you're in charge of our public education system, you don't use either. Does that mean you don't have a perspective on how bad it actually is?
I mean, you agree with that, but Simon, what's your view?
Yeah. Again, does it affect the Tories' argument of does it affect our policy? Well, possibly, because he doesn't use it. He might have grown up with his parents and that in it, but like, again, how much did he use it?
I think it's a private matter, and I think I think public figures should be allowed to have some element of privacy over what they do. I don't dispute the argument that actually, you know, when you think about his responsibilities and what he needs to consider, having some sort of perspective on how he looks at those things, you know, might be a factor. But
well, see, it's all about taking taking public respect. But as someone who puts out public videos, my videos aren't private. I make it so that it's not for under 16s or under 18s, whatever it is. Because I swear, because I smoke. I don't want to advertise this to children. It's personal responsibility. But now, being open about this stuff is better than hiding away. It just is in general. When it comes to being in public in public service, you tend to be better off by being open.
is that really our business about the way that he conducts his own health and his own private life? I don't think that's right.
But the argument is he's a representative of the public.
And I would just say that if you get it down this argument that you need to have a perspective and a lived experience.
Again, there's only a minority of people I'm not gonna answer that. I'd straight up answer, yeah, I use the NHS. No, I haven't got any money to use the private sector. I wouldn't do it anyway.
Experience of something, then it really sort of limits what anybody can do and the decisions that anybody can make on it.
I think we should be honest about our own experience of using public services so that the public can then judge what we say about them. But
again, it's because the thing is the important point of this is that he's the Prime Minister. Any MP is a public representative. We vote them in to represent us on the world stage or on the national stage.
I do agree that the issue here isn't whether or not Rishi Sunak uses
Steve,
the private healthcare.
What that does is conflate.
It's whether he understands there's a problem with the NHS.
But that conflates the idea that understanding a problem with the NHS means that you have to have had terrible experiences of it.
It doesn't.
I use the NHS.
No, see, she's applying an absolute her own bias here. No, that's not what was meant. What was meant was, you'd have a better idea of creating policy for the NHS in particular if you have a better idea of how it works because you use it. That's just logic. That's not, again, it's not an absolute, but a general rule could be applied here.
I've got great experience of using the NHS. So to me, I wouldn't necessarily use the word crisis in my own experience. But however, if I took a step back from this and understood what people are saying, what nurses are saying in terms of their strike.
But this is what Sunak needs to be doing. This is what he's not doing. This is part of the argument, love.
Action, what the numbers look like, I would say actually the NHS is going through.
But I'm open about saying I've never used private healthcare, and that doesn't stop me coming on this show and saying that we should use spare capacity in the private sector to alleviate the pressure on the NHS.
But that works the other way. Just because the Prime Minister might or might not have used the private sector doesn't mean that his policy, therefore, is going to be influenced by.
No, it doesn't. Not necessarily. But look at the amount of people who do more often than not use private and are in a position of power, and people who use the NHS and are in a position of power, the policy creating position. Again, not all Labour MPs are in the NHS. Yeah, some of them have stick with private, but majority are NHS patients. That's why Labour tends to, do more for the NHS when they're in power. Logic.
By that experience, and therefore it begs the question: why are we talking about this? Let's actually talk about the issues which
I think the reason we're talking about
the issues themselves
is because he gives the impression of not fully grasping how serious the crisis is. And you talked about him spending all day.
The whole thing of him being a billionaire and being or a millionaire and being a multi-millionaire and being Prime Minister. Again, he's supposed to be a representative of the public. How is him being a multi-millionaire how does that make him a representative of the public? I will tell you, it fucking doesn't.
On Saturday, having those crises.
It makes him a representative of a small minority who are hardly public.
Talks. Well, the NHS has been in crisis basically since the summer. We've had repeated warnings about how bad it's getting, how bad ambulance waits are, how bad the waits at A&E are. Stories.
We've been hearing this not just over the last year, but years, plural. Get it right.
About hospitals running out of oxygen, stories about patients being treated in corridors, stories about 300 to 500 people dying per week because of the delays in emergency medicine. For him to only have realised this weekend, this might be a crisis, that does speak to a lack of understanding and a lack of foresight and planning, and therefore it is acceptable to say, does this man fully grasp the state that the NHS is in?
Robert? No, I'm sorry. I don't think that is a fair characterisation at all. I don't think the government has ever been in denial about the position with the NHS. I think,
Fucking bollocks! You've let it get worse and worse year on year. This is complete bullshit. You can argue against all you like, Robert Buckland. You are the one who is wrong, factually speaking.
See,
you get the complaints by some about why do idiots like this get let on to programs like this. It's to prove just how much they are idiots.
By its actions, it's consistently increased investment. It's bringing forward a workforce strategy.
Well,
all these things are vitally
because people can't get into hospitals and people are dying at home. That is the result of 13 years of Tory rules.
Well, look, I'm sorry, I don't agree with that.
What, you might not agree with it, mate. Those are the facts. This sort of shit was a rarity under the last Labour government. Not a commonality. Not a norm. This was becoming a norm under 13 years of Tory degradation.
But I am not denying at the same time that there aren't problems. Of course there are. I see it from my own casework.
You've made it worse!
On a regular basis. I was speaking to my...
Just look at the voting records when it comes to Tories. Most of the shit when it comes to the NHS or the welfare system, when it comes to improving it, actually improving it, putting more money actually into the NHS itself, not money that goes in and then is just outsourced straight away. His argument falls to pieces as soon as you dig just a little bit deeper.
Hospital chief executive the day after New Year's Day because of the pressures on my local hospital. But if I'm experiencing...
But this has been getting worse for years, since before the pandemic.
The Prime Minister is not living in a fantasy world. He is understanding it as well.
Shouldn't people with the means to pay for private healthcare do so to take off some of the pressure on the NHS?
I think there's an argument for that. Unfortunately, it's wrong to think of private healthcare in this country as sort of extra capacity that doesn't get used unless people pay for it. A lot of the doctors work across both.
Indeed.
And the doctors who will treat you and put you at the front of the queue if you go private are the same ones who will treat you if you have to wait for 2 years for the same procedure.
Isn't that the issue? I mean, isn't Rachel right? We're talking about the same, broadly, the same people, the same doctors, the same nurses being stretched across both private and the NHS.
I think there's an important point underneath this, which is that we never want to go anywhere near a two-tier health service in this country, where if you're wealthy, you get a better standard of care than if you're not wealthy. We have a national health service that is free at the point of use for everybody, and that is a guiding principle of our national health service. It's why Labour's plan isn't to say the wealthy must pay to go private. It's that the state will pay to use spare capacity in the private sector and open it to everybody, because the health service, it's so fundamental, must always remain free at the point of use for everybody.
It's okay, this is about beds, spare beds, spare buildings. I mean, I wonder if Labour, I haven't seen this anywhere, but I wonder if Labour would reopen the Nightingale hospitals.
We break the NHS.
But clearly, increasing numbers of people have felt it is worth putting their hands in their own pockets to pay for private healthcare. I mean, Robert, big increase in the number of people taking out private healthcare insurance. Almost 500,000 additional people have taken out policies in the last year. Should they be discouraged from doing so?
Well, I don't think they should be discouraged. But, I want to, again, an outbreak of consensus, reiterate the point that a health service free at the point of demand is the cornerstone of the NHS. However, I think there are two things here. There's the short-term challenges and then the longer-term thinking about how we fund and the way we spend our money and what the workforce is going to look like, because there's no doubt we've got big shortages in our workforce. We're asking too few people to do too much. I think that what we need to be doing now is coming together and thinking long-term across party. I hesitate to use the words Royal Commission, but I do think that we do need
a Royal Commission for years.
Well, it doesn't have to. I know the adage is
but they are, aren't they?
They take minutes and last years. But I think a very carefully defined set of criteria could come up with something that we can all agree on to save the long-term future of our NHS.
But you guys won't want to. You don't want to. There are some Tories that do. But Tory ideology is against the NHS anyway. It always has been.
I mean, the thing is, Sir Keir Starmer, when he stood for the leadership a few years ago, did say something quite different in that platform. He said, as you have repeated, public services should be in public hands, but there should be an end to outsourcing in our NHS. That's different to what he's saying now.
Well, right now we're in a crisis because after 13 years of serial underfunding of our National Health Service, it's a breaking point. It's on its knees. Like, I think 7,000 doctors last year applied for permits to work abroad. We're hemorrhaging staff because of the state of the National Health Service. Right now, there's a crisis. I wish Rishi Sunak would stand up and recognise that fact, because this is why these other issues about his use of private healthcare keep arising. Does he recognise that a crisis is a crisis or not? You know, it's almost like a repeat of the James Callaghan crisis, what crisis situation, but relating to the National Health Service. And then he needs to take the actions that Labour's putting forward, use the spare capacity in the private sector now to get those backlogs down, and then let's scrap non-dom status, let's use the billions that would raise to fund and increase the numbers of nurses and doctors, and let's get those waiting lists down permanently and start treating patients.
Is it a problem? Inconsistency, one might say, of Sir Keir Starmer's...
and before anyone harps, this has been said in other interviews by Starmer and other Labour MPs, right? At the same time, we put investment into the education for more nurses and more doctors. The investment into the infrastructure for more of these. They have already said this. And when people panic, like about about Starmer saying we're opening our government checkbook, well, again, it's a case of that we're not going to splash out. We're going to spend what is needed. There's a difference. It's not a case of, oh, we're going to cut and snip and no. They're going to, from what I've seen, they're going to spend as needed. Spend to invest. But again, it's not about going stupid. It's not about coming out with stupid ideas. Largely, it's also to get away from the serial accusation over the many decades of Labour being the party that wastes government money. Which isn't government money, it's public money, but whatever.
Pronouncements on this issue. I mean, he did say end outsourcing in our NHS. Steve is saying you've got to be phlegmatic and practical about these things.
I think the crisis that we're facing at the moment is so dire that any solutions should be on the table, and I think that should be true for the government and for Labour. I think we do need a much longer term conversation about the future of the NHS and the fact that so many of its problems are actually not healthcare problems, they're social care problems, they're problems in the cuts to community funding in all manner of areas that are coming through into frontline NHS services because of a decade of underfunding. That is a long-term conversation to have. At the moment, I feel like if the answer is we could spend this money, cut the backlog, get people discharged from hospital beds into sort of private social care places, and just get through this winter, it would be quite ludicrous to not consider those options. I don't think we should let ideology get in the way of pragmatism, but then that longer conversation actually does need to happen, and I don't think any of the political parties currently are bold enough to do that.
I mean, it's 200...
Am I living in a fantasy world or something? Or have Labour just not said about putting investment into infrastructure and training for more nurses and doctors? Did I invent this? Pretty sure I didn't.
100 million.
Not only that, but I'm pretty sure the fucking Stephen Reid said earlier in this fucking programme. Like, people hearing what they want to hear and not hearing what's convenient. It's hilarious.
Pounds the extra that's been announced to try and help care homes provide extra beds to discharge more patients from hospital. I mean, that is a sticking plaster, as Labour has called it.
I think there is a difficulty in terms of trying to deal with,
Right. Again, this was all part of Labour speech, Starmer's speech on fucking Sunday. Monday? Saturday. One of them. Yes, this is a sticking plaster, but this has been one of the huge things about his fucking speech was that all it's been is sticking plasters for so long. We need a long-term investment plan when it comes to our healthcare and so. Like, like, I did not invent this in my head. I watched this live. This is shit Starmer's actually talking about. And you get these idiots saying, oh, but none of the parties are saying anything about it. Labour were just doing it the other day. What? Again, Starmer isn't God. He's not perfect. You know? I mean, don't get me fucking started when it comes to the Zionism that's on the rise in the Labour Party due to him. Don't get me fucking started. But when it comes to all this other stuff, don't be fucking stupid. Don't be selectively deaf. Labour have been saying they put more investment into infrastructure and training for more nurses. I'd like to see someone put a question, would you utilise the Nightingale hospitals? And if someone has already done that, I would like someone to forward me the link to that footage, because I have not seen it. This would be a question I put to Labour, is would you utilise the Nightingale hospitals that were utilised in the pandemic?
The pressures that are on the NHS at the moment, and hoping that some money is going to get us through at this point in time. I agree with Rachel that actually we do need to take a step back and have a look at the whole of system approach, because one of the things that's missing from this argument this morning is that we've had a pandemic in the middle of this that has created an enormous amount of pressure and actually.
But the arguments are that a lot of these problems, have exposed.
The pandemic has exposed some of the structural issues. Now, we also have to remember here that ministers actually are not in charge of the day-to-day running of the health service. That is done.
No, but they're the ones who plot business moguls at the top of the NHS instead of actual NHS fucking staff. Have it run by NHS staff who know how it works. Not only that, but have it run by people who are willing to change it in the right way. It's ministers who appoint the people in charge of the NHS on a day-to-day running. The government have a say here, but they put the wrong people in charge consistently.
With organisations like NHS England and in various other groups and in trusts. So actually we need to get serious about the fact that espousing policy from Westminster is not actually going to get to the crux of how these things are run and how they can be changed. And it's a much more technocratic argument than we are allowing
I think that's a
credit for.
cop-out. I have to say that's
No, it's not
It is a fucking cop-out.
Ministers decide the level of funding,
Yes,
and ministers decide the general approach. And there's not been a push towards prevention, which there should have been over the last decade.
But it doesn't necessarily translate into what you're seeing at the moment and what you listed in terms of ambulances not meeting times with having people on trolley.
But this was getting worse before the pandemic. The NHS was warning that this was going to happen before the pandemic happened. So again, Stephen Reed's right. What Sam Ashar is saying here is a complete fucking cop-out.
In hospitals, that is actually an operational function. Now, I'm not for 1 minute saying that there aren't policy decisions that need to be made here, but let's be clear about what crisis we're dealing with at what point in the chain.
Yes, and remember that the health service, we've obsessed about hospitals and buildings. We're running a national illness service, not a national health service, and we've got to look more seriously at early intervention, health and well-being, preventing.
But people were telling you to do this over half a decade ago. Again, the health service was nowhere near this when Labour left office. This has only happened under the Conservative government, and they are trying to sell people that none of this is their fault. Bollocks and shenanigans.
these conditions from escalating. In the
and then maybe
first place.
people say you should have done that over the last 12 years. But anyway,
I think we're on our way to integrated healthcare already. The government's moving in that direction.
All right.
There is a consensus here. We just need to be honest about it and have some of the technocratic conversations that some are rightly identified.
all right, well, let's talk about strikes because they are ongoing. Talks between government ministers and unions to avert further strikes are happening today with various sectors.
They do a fucking fruitless because the government does not give a shite.
Prime Minister was asked about whether this year's pay settlement, and this year I mean 22 to 23, would be on the table in any discussions. This is what he said to Laura Kunsberg yesterday.
The first thing we need to do is start talking properly, and that's why Monday is really important.
But they've been wanting you to come to the table and talk properly for over a month. You have been the one refusing to do it. This is why it was correct for whoever it was to say that Rishi Sunak has been an ostrich hiding from the problems.
We want to have these conversations. We want them to be honest. We want them to be...
But for clarity, will you talk about this year's pay deal on Monday with the
No, we won't.
So the most important is to be talking.
About this year's
it wouldn't
pay?
be right.
No, it isn't. You could go in there and talk about fuck all. That's not the important thing. The important thing is to talk about what they're striking about, you fucking bellend.
It wouldn't be right for me to sit here and start having negotiations in public with you or anyone.
No. That's... Starmer said the same thing, right? That's fair enough. Don't expect the government to come out and say what exactly has been said in the negotiations. What details have been ironed out. That's not what's being expected here. What's being expected is for you to at least give us some detail of what's going on. Not just, oh, the important thing is that we are talking. No, because you could be talking about porn. It's no wonder the unions came out all fucking pissed off.
No, but forgive me, we have to be really clear about this because up until now, government ministers have said that they will not discuss pay for this year. That's what people have been saying. Are you today saying something different? Are you saying, yes, let's talk about pay for this year?
The government has always been clear that it's happy to talk about pay that is...
That's a direct lie! You just lied! Because the government has turned around and said it will not talk about pay. Several times. Publicly. He's just lied. And what about your promises, fucking sneaky Sunak? Prick.
Responsible, that's affordable for the country. That's always been clear. But we have to look now. We're about to start a new pay settlement round for this year. Right, we're about to start that independent process. And before...
The unions came out and said that you weren't willing to talk about payments for this coming one either. So that's another pile of bullshit.
That process starts, the government is keen to sit down with the unions and talk about pay and make sure that they understand.
No, it isn't. Again, this is a lie. If it was actually completely willing to sit down with the unions, it would have done so before Geola. Christmas to everyone else. You could have had this done before the winter solstice. But you didn't, because you're a fucking Tory prick.
And where we're coming from. That's why we cover it very transparently, all the evidence we have on what's affordable.
Because I just want to be really, really clear. As a yes or no question, a yes or no answer if you can, will you talk to nurses about increasing pay this year? Yes or no?
We are about to start that process.
That's about next year.
That's literally about the year that we're about to start.
Yes, Rishi Sunak talking to Laura Kunsberg about the negotiations. Well, funnily enough, on that same programme, the Royal College of Nursing General Secretary Pat Cullen seemed to think there was a chink of light in what Rishi Sunak was saying. Do you agree with her?
Well, yes, I do. I mean, I was watching that conversation carefully.
Were you confused?
Well, there's a difference between the financial year and the calendar year.
Right, so was he...
Coming up in April, But again, this is me talking retroactively here, or retrospectively, sorry, because knowing what's happened afterwards. The government refused to talk about this year's payments either. So again, it was complete bullshit.
Deliberately disingenuous.
I think that may well have been where they were. I mean, I've said, I've gone on the record and said that I think we need to find a middle way now. I think that nurses are under huge pressure. I think that finding some bespoke solution without trying to upend the entire independent pay review body mechanism, which I think is a job that won't solve the problem now. Some bespoke solution, I think, would be sensible.
Right. So
and that's what I hope will.
You think nurses should be a special case?
I do.
And you think there should be a special case in terms of reopening? Did you get from that clip of Rishi Sunak that he would look at reopening this year's pay settlement?
Well, as I've said, I think trying to upend the recommendations of the independent pay review body is probably a task that will not be a task of moment. But there might be a particular solution that could.
Many of the unions have said, they've come out and have said, well, at the end of the last Christian year, that they weren't that they were pulling out of that. So, what material sense does what you just say have any hold?
Would help nurses now in this financial year ahead of any recommendation.
I'll come back to what you think that might look like. Do you think there's a chink of light? Do you think that Rishi Sunak was hinting in any way that negotiations could be reopened for the settlement this financial year? So from April 22 to April 23.
Well, first off, it struck me as quite a laughable attempt to try and cover up another screeching U-turn, because we've had months, and I've been coming on your show and others, where Conservative ministers and the Prime Minister have said it would be wrong to sit down and have direct negotiations with the trade unions in the National Health Service, in the railways, to try and resolve this Conservative winter of discontent. And yet here we are yesterday, the Prime Minister, absolutely different possession, never said any of those things in the past, and today apparently they're going to meet. Well, we need to see whether those are genuine discussions, whether there's a real negotiation, or whether ministers are going to sit there with their arms folded and sucking their teeth. But, if there is a chink, if they're going to sit down and do the things Labour's been saying all this time, then there is a chink of light. But there needs to be proposals on the table. We've said it's partly about pay, but it's also about terms and conditions and pressures. The non-dom issue is very critical here, because there's billions of pounds that could be taken and used to increase the numbers of nurses and doctors and reduce the pressure. And Labour's been advocating that for about a year now.
All right, well, you say there could be a chink of light, not according to this Unite negotiator that's just come out of meeting with ministers.
So how did it go? Not well.
It's not a happy chat.
The government have missed yet another opportunity to put this.
That's his one, One Kasab, Unite.
Right, we came here in good faith. What they want to talk about is productivity. Productivity, when our members are working 18 hours.
So, they go in there, will you give us more pay? No, we want more productivity. How are we supposed to be more productive when you just want to make it harder on us? This is not Victorian London anymore. When we don't want to go back that way either. I'm surprised this guy's fucking pissed off.
Hour shifts. Quite how you become more productive with that, I do not know. But today, unfortunately, despite us showing up in good faith, the government have missed yet another opportunity.
Disappointed, Robert?
Well, and Unite, I think, is representing paramedics, so a different dispute from the nurses themselves. It's concerning to hear.
That's not the point. That wasn't the point. You had to assemble it, you cunt.
I do think that both sides need to give a lot here. I hope that.
Well, from what we just saw, the government isn't willing to give damn fuck all.
That particular reaction isn't then reflective of a wider problem here, because I do think that communication and talking is what needs to happen.
What's wrong with reform, which is clearly what was being put on the table by the government ministers there?
Well, there does need to be reform, absolutely. We need to be moving towards.
That's not what the guy was kicking off about. The guy was kicking off about the government coming in saying, "Oh, you just need more. We want more productivity." How? pricks.
Prevention, that's what. But isn't it interesting that he came out there and he didn't talk about pay, he talked about 18-hour shifts. And this isn't just about money, it's about the pressure that our NHS workers are under. You know, I lost my dad in hospital last summer, and I spoke to some of the nurses that were looking after him and was astonished to find out they were working double shifts. I mean, I couldn't have had, I couldn't have been more in awe of the care and love that they were giving. But to make people work double shifts isn't fair. And
well, they've had enough, Robert, haven't they? I mean, people have just had enough of these sorts of conditions in the health service.
People under huge pressure, and there aren't enough in the workforce to cover.
And whose fucking fault is that? Finally, Robert Buckland comes out with there's not enough people. Well, fucking duh.
Everything that needs to be done, and that pressure's being felt as well, which is why I think the government is right to acknowledge this and to start talking.
Right, what do you think? Is there any
Obviously, they were talking about fuck all. The government went in there with the aim of pissing them off. Either that, or just went in there with the aim of, we want you to be more productive, but they're not gonna, they don't expect to give themselves. It's ridiculous.
Optimism about strikes being averted. Both of you listening to what you just heard there from the Unite negotiator, and the way that Pat Cullen from the RCN interpreted Rishi Sunak's comments.
Well, I was quite heartened by the suggestion that maybe the compromise would be a one-off payment for this financial year. And the reason I found that sort of heartening was because both sides are treating this as though it's sort of a game of chicken, and whoever's toughest and whoever holds out the most wins.
No, I'm sorry, that's the government doing that. The unions have said, why don't you come to the table and negotiate? They already know that 19% isn't going to happen. But the government are refusing to even come to the table to negotiate when it comes to pay. This is the problem. One of the problems.
And if you can do anything to have some kind of compromise so they can both save face and say, we didn't give in on everything, but here's a solution, then that's obviously a constructive way forward. My worry is the government's attitude to this.
I don't like this one-off payment bullshit. I don't. Why? Because what's that going to do from next year? Or the year after that? It's a sticking plaster. And not only that, but it's a shit one.
Has been to talk very, very tough and to say we're going to solve it all with legislation that will ban industrial action. That's our solution to stop these strikes going ahead. Well, you can stop strikes from going ahead. You can't force people to work in the health service if the pay isn't competitive and if the working conditions are so dire that they feel so burned out they can't.
Doctors and nurses are going to fucking Australia. Australia. The other side of the fucking world. Because the terms, conditions and pay are better than they are in the home country.
Continue to do that. So actually the government's position on it is going to make the staffing crisis worse.
Well, we're just hearing out of the lobby, which is where the Prime Minister's spokesperson talks to journalists at Westminster, and they haven't ruled out this one-off payment. We can show you the headline in The Guardian that Rachel's been talking about. Prime Minister looks at one-off cash offer to end nurses' strike. Do you think that would work?
Oh, I hope so. I mean, that is a really good negotiating point. I think that is going to support the nurses who need that immediate
And that would be for this year, and then look at the pay settlement for next.
And then he can look at the next financial year. And I think it's...
No. I'm sorry, but no. The government could be taking a look at this right now. They just don't want to. This is an ideological problem. The government, the Tories are small state conservatives. They don't like having to put so much into the state. They don't like all this intervention, not this style of intervention anyway. That's being completely ignored.
Really important, actually, to distinguish. It's something you just said, Rachel. on the strike legislation, to distinguish between something that is about economic productivity and also what you need for public servants who are under intense pressure in the health service. And I think this is an important way of making that distinction.
Would you support that, a one-off payment to get a settlement for this year?
It's absolutely worth looking at as something on the table, but you have to bear in mind, over the last 13 years, nurses have had a real terms pay cut of 20%. We all stood on our doorsteps and applauded them in the pandemic, including government ministers. And now this year, when the pressures on them are so intense, they're being offered another 5% real terms pay cut. And no wonder, tragically, National Health Service staff are leaving in droves. 7,000 doctors this year applied for a permit to work overseas. A quarter of them go to Australia. Now, what are we doing to our NHS under this government?
Would you support a one-off payment?
Yes, I would. I think then it avoids having to upend the whole structure, which will take ages, and it deals with the problem now. And on minimum service levels, let's not forget that...
But the structure still needs fixing or upending or whatever. I just want to go, yeah, we'll do this, and then it's done and dusted. No, it isn't done and dusted.
Our private nurses undertook to provide those minimum service levels when they went on strike. I think that issue is totally divorced from particularly the nurses' case.
I don't think it's divorced when that's what the government's line is. We want to end the strikes, so we will pass legislation to end these strikes. That has been the government message.
But the legislation wouldn't be about that. It would be about minimum...
That's what the legislation has been... That's what the government has been saying. What you are doing right now is contradicting your government.
Service levels, which was a manifesto commitment in the transport sector. I think the government, if it should focus very much upon what it said in the manifesto, deliver something reasonable that I think the public would support. This isn't about... and in fact, it wouldn't have retrospective effects. It wouldn't affect the current disputes, but it would allow, I think, the balance to be struck well in the future in favour of
Stephen Reed signed.
Sometimes life-threatening inconvenience to the public.
But the nurses, to be fair to them, already did that, and I think it's very provocative. In the middle of a situation like this, for the government to come out with a proposal that if you follow it through to its logical conclusion, means the government would be sacking nurses at a time when we've got a crisis in our NHS.
Dealt with that
what is the benefit of doing
well, I think the two issues are divorced. I think the minimum service level...
Of course you do, because you don't want them to be connected. But just because you don't want them to be connected doesn't mean they aren't. Idealism over realism here. It's ridiculous.
Argument relates to the transport sector, and I don't think this is about an attack on nurses at all.
We've never had a strike in our NHS before this, ever in its entirety.
Which is why I agree, and this is why I think we should be taking a middle way and finding a solution
I wish your
to help our hard-pressed nurses.
Well,
I think
actually, maybe they are now with that lobby briefing.
Well, and just before we move on, you said there should be a bespoke settlement for nurses. Is that realistic when you've got all these other sectors also possibly out on strike? We could be looking at teacher strikes too.
The government have made this problem all by themselves.
Give one sector a particular pay deal for next year. Let's say it was around 10% and not others.
I think it's politically possibly a logical move, given the NHS crisis and given that is the thing that people are most worried about and also have the most sympathy for healthcare workers as opposed to people in other areas. But you still run into the same problems, which is if you're not paying people who work in your public services enough, they will find jobs elsewhere. You will continue to have staffing shortages, you will struggle to recruit, and public services will continue to crumble and continue to get worse. And you can't sort of change that by sort of rhetoric and this attitude of we're just going to be really tough. You know, you're still going to have those fundamental structural problems.
There's a bigger problem underneath all of this, which is the fact that the government's failed to grow the economy, so there's not enough money to fund the public services that we need. You know, the economy grew 50% more every single year under the last Labour government than this Tory government, and we've got the chairman of Tesco saying that there's only one player on the pitch when it comes to economic growth, and that's Labour. He's not a natural Labour supporter. So the government losing grip of the economy underpins a lot of this, but we need to fund...
Well, I'll let you... The Labour years ended with a 6% contraction in the economy.
I remember as well that we didn't have waiting lists in the NHS.
Well, let's not do ancient history, as it seems...
the government, we've been presiding over economic growth, and growth has been providing the resources for our public service.
Growth has done that and that and that and that. Under Labour, it was like that. Yes, it was in a bit of a bubble. But even then, it depends on, like, It went like that. And only in the past couple of years did it start doing that, and then the pandemic hit and it went like that. Right? But if we still had Labour in, instead of switching over to the Tories and Lib Dems, if we still had Labour in with those with the policies that we're going along with, that line would have kept on going.
The lowest growth of the 38 members of the...
And this contraction by 6% was the 2008-2009 recession, which was not caused by Labour. And again, this is another attempt by the Tories to attribute Labour to the 2008-2009 recession, which was caused by Americans and facilitated by Tory members, like our current Prime Minister, in banks like Deutsche Bank.
But why do we inject 34 billion into the health service since 2019? I mean, you can't ignore.
It needed more. It wasn't enough. He's just like, oh, we put this amount in. It wasn't enough. Oh, but we still put... Yeah, but it wasn't enough. There's no point in saying it as if it was a great thing when it wasn't enough, because obviously it wasn't a great thing, because it was not enough. Bell end.
Or the reality that this government has presided over record amounts of investment in our national health service.
Oh, bullshit. It's not been record amounts of investment, you cunt. It's been record amounts of money pushed through the NHS into outsourcing into private companies. Like, this guy lives on a completely different in a completely different universe. It's ridiculous.
All right, we're going to pause there because we're going to talk about energy prices. As you know, households and businesses have been struggling with rising bills and have received some help from the government. In a moment, we're going to be talking to business owner Jo Bevilacqua. She runs a hair and beauty salon in Peterborough. We'll come to you in just a moment. But I just want to show you this headline in The Guardian, because we're going to talk about this first, which is why are wholesale gas prices falling, and importantly, will it cut UK bills? Let's ask Dara Vyas, Deputy CEO of Energy UK, the trade association of the energy industry. Hello to you. Why are prices falling now?
Afternoon. So it's a good question, and it's a completely legitimate question to be asking. I think the first thing to note is that energy is still actually quite expensive. It's definitely not, we've not returned to the prices we were seeing 18 months ago. And although wholesale gas prices are now below what they were before Russia invaded Ukraine, they're still historically high. Now, the reason we don't see that go straight through to bills is because actually suppliers buy in advance, and you want and expect them to, so that you have certainty in pricing. Right. So that's called hedging. So when you're buying in advance, they'll have bought at prices from 3 to 6 months ago. So there is a lag, there is a time lag to when prices will change for retail customers. They don't change overnight. So when wholesale energy prices did start to rise back in August, September 2021, there was a lag before it fed through to consumer bills in sort of 21-22, where customers were paying significantly less than the spot price. So it does work both ways. Right.
So can we expect prices to come down in the near future? Could you give us a sort of ballpark? Not overnight, but maybe in the next few months?
So I think, this is potentially good news, but we do need to see a sustained fall. And whilst analysts are predicting lower prices, they've also said it is too soon to predict what will happen to bills going forward. There is a lot of uncertainty, and that's because, we are still going through, Russia's still invading Ukraine. We've also seen the end of zero COVID in China, and that's going to change, it's going to change economic activity and gas prices.
Dara, just stay with us. Jo, listening to that, how does that make you feel? Dara's saying that actually we've got to see sustained falls, however long that may have to actually carry on for, before it would be fed into our bills.
Yeah, I think as a small business owner, it's the lack of uncertainty that we've been facing for the last kind of nearly 3 years now, with everything that's been hit at us. And I know every single other business owner, as well as myself, is exhausted from every obstacle that we're trying to face with very little control. For myself, looking at our contract is at the end of April. So does that leave us in good stead? Maybe, from what's been said today, but who knows? It all just seems a bit of a gamble. We're looking at increasing our...
So what are we looking at? By the time we feel it, it's going to be like next year.
prices anyway, due to kind of the national living wage going up and all the other bills that we've had going up. And it's, do we try and commit to something now at the prices that they are now, or do we kind of hold our nerve and wait until nearer to April to then commit to a new contract? It's just all the uncertainty is very difficult for us, because looking at, I'm lucky enough to have a broker that's been looking at the markets for us. And just this morning, with the quotes that he's giving us, if we were to sign up today at today's prices, even though they have fallen over the weekend, our gas is still looking 4 times more expensive than what we're paying at the moment. And our electricity is 3 times the amount.
I mean, Dara, can you offer any advice to Jo about what she should do at this point?
I mean, I think that on the business side of things, there is the energy bill relief scheme that the government's put in, and we are actually expecting an announcement from government, possibly today, but certainly this week, on the future of that relief scheme post spring. I completely understand it's a business to business transaction when energy suppliers are supplying businesses and small businesses, and so therefore, working through a broker is definitely an option. Lots of people do take up. Prices are higher than they were before, and I completely see her point of view. It is very different to the domestic household market, where we've got the price cap, which makes it slightly easier to support customers, I think.
Right, and actually, Jo, perhaps you could tell our viewers, what help have you had from the government, if any? None. It looks like.
We signed our contract 3 years ago, and what I've been told by the broker is that the help was only for contracts that were agreed in 2022. So we've actually not any help whatsoever.
And have you managed to hold on to all your staff?
Not all, no. It's really difficult industry. We've lost, from the first pandemic, from the first lockdown, we lost a majority after each and every lockdown. We lost more and more staff.
Yes.
For the uncertainty, we try and pay our staff over and above what maybe other hair salons are able to pay theirs. But our whole industry is in a bit of a mess.
Yes.
Quite a big salon, so we pay VAT. There's only 35% of salons that actually have an employee-based business.
Well, Jo, I've got a Conservative MP, former minister, here in the studio. Jo's had no help at all with the business. Does that surprise you?
Well, I think the scheme was designed to help particular firms that had gone into contracts at a time when rises were, quite dramatic. And I think, it's an unfortunate reality for Jo and other businesses like hers that she's about to renew her contract at a time of much higher prices, and therefore I think it's really incumbent on the government, when they come out with their announcement about the future of the scheme after March, to address the high need, high energy use businesses like Jo's, and those businesses like Jo's that are having to enter into new dramatically higher contracts. And also with businesses, very often they have to pay big upfront costs on these contracts. So the way it's structured, I think, is a real problem for a lot of businesses. And I think Ofgem need to step up far more aggressively and deal with some of these problems that businesses are facing now.
Right, the cliff edge, as we know, is coming at the beginning of April, end of March, and it's been delayed or postponed, the government announcement about which sectors, which industries would continue to get some sort of help, taking it that Jo's hasn't had any for the reasons that she's explained. What would Labour do on April the 1st for businesses? Continue the scheme that is in place or not?
Well, first off, the continuing delays are really damaging to small. I've been speaking to small businesses like the one we've been hearing from.
But what would you do? We know that. I've said that there's been a delay. It's coming this week. But what would you do come April if Labour was in power in terms of energy-intensive industries or business in general?
Well, in terms of energy-intensive business, Labour's already announced a £1 billion contingency fund that was properly funded and accounted for to help those businesses that are struggling the most. Right. But there's more support that we should be giving to particularly high street businesses that are really struggling. And we've for a long time now been proposing scrapping business rates and replacing it with an online digital sales tax, so that the online giants pay their fair share. That would reduce the cost to an average small business by £5,000 a year, which I imagine at a time of such uncertainty would be very welcome, but might even save some of those small businesses from going under.
Jo, what do you make of what you've heard from both politicians, Conservative and Labour?
Yeah, I can't imagine all the things that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, don't worry too much about them.
I just don't think it's enough. every time I log on to social media, I'm in lots of different groups of hair salon owners, and every day there is somebody selling off their stock or trying to sell their business because it's just not feasible. And I think looking at the numbers, are we going to be another victim of increased energy costs and all the other things that are put on us? Because actually we have to pay our staff well, we have to pay our bills.
Yes.
And the only way to do that is to keep increasing our prices. And are we then going to price ourselves out of the market when people can just go to somebody else's house and have a haircut maybe done at half the price?
All right, Jo. I'm just going to ask our other guest just to respond to Joe's situation, and it won't be isolated, of course, and what the government should do when they make this announcement about continued support for businesses. It's going to be vastly.
Gotta say, not got much to say here because I'm not sure what I would do. I would have to do a deeper dig. Although, what Steve Reed said sounds to be, in part, a part of a good plan.
Reduced. I think we can all agree on that. Should it be?
I think, having spoken to business leaders in my sort of previous role, the key thing that I was told again and again and again is it's not actually always about the level of support, it's about the certainty, and it's about getting really clear guidelines and also making the process really easy to use. And it does seem that in this circumstance, the government sort of hasn't been prepared for that, and the continuing uncertainty, maybe a couple of weeks doesn't matter that much when you're a minister. When you're a small business owner, it is the difference between laying off staff and not doing so.
Well, it seems a bit late in the day.
Well, I think it's difficult for them because they're going to have to work out which is the greater priority. I mean, we've just spent the last segment talking about strikes, and any kind of one-off payment is going to cost. So they're going to have to balance that against what they might have still available in the kitty to go towards energy. Now, if you're focused on growth, which this government is supposed to be, there is an argument to suggest that actually they do need to do a little bit more for small businesses to be able to extend.
A little bit more. Just a little bit. It's the way people say these words. No, more needs to be done. Just a little bit more.
And that support, and you're right, certainty is the absolute critical factor.
And speed as well, because I was speaking to my businesses in my patch. At this point, even if you've got a broker, because some businesses, if energy costs rocket in the way that they would do if there wasn't support, become unviable. They can't get the good deals even if they're available. So we really need the government to bring this forward and let businesses know now what's going to happen so that they can plan.
Joe, did you want to say something? Oh, yeah, go on.
Help is great, don't get me wrong, and it saves so many business over COVID with all the stuff that they did for us. But actually, why are we going to be taking more of the government money, which is obviously quite strange at the moment, and there are different priorities, to pay the energy companies to allow us to have a discount on them? Why are they not?
It's not government money. It's not public part. This is public money, not government money. What do you think? I mean, the money that comes in from taxes, at least a portion of that should be, portioned off for people in this situation, so the state can help.
Taxing? Why are these energy?
Well, that's a good point. And very briefly, Robert Buckland's going to try and answer it for us. Why aren't they?
I think Joe makes a really powerful point. I think let's all forget the government already imposes a windfall tax, and indeed the rate of corporation tax is higher for the oil and gas companies than average. But I think it's also important to reiterate the point I made about Ofgem. We really need to reform the way that contracts for businesses are being applied. It's really
all right. And on that, I'm going to say thank you to both Joe and Dara for that. And all of my guests here today. I'll be back.
That was frustrating. Like I said, I have sympathy with Stephen Reed. I've been asked questions, that demand an absolute answer, where an absolute answer is unrealistic. It's only ever going to get you in trouble. So my big takeaway from this episode, of Politics Live, is Labour are really trying to fight off this absolutist mindset. Starmer was doing exactly the same thing. It's not about the numbers. No, with immigrants, it's not about the numbers. It's about what we do to stop the people, to either help, put up processing centres in France and other places in Europe. Come to actual agreements instead of being bellicose with the with EU nations. I just, all this is, how much would you do? How much would Labour do? What number would be acceptable to Labour? It's not about the fucking numbers. That's surface shite. But yeah, this has been One Angry Pagan. Seattle Wheater, One Angry Pagan. Please like, subscribe, comment. The second part to Salford Ridge on Sunday will be going up in the next 24 hours or so. I'm in trouble getting that video up for some fucking reason. But yeah. Blessed Thursday everyone, so I can't even say my words properly. Blessed Thursday everyone, blessed be. And have a good day. Have a good people.